if you're the learner, it's going to be up to you. You're the one that has to take responsibility. First thing that I'd say, really start challenging the way that you do things and questioning the beliefs that you have about your learning capacity and where that comes from. A lot of people, like especially professionals, they'll say, I can't go back to uni, I can't take this course, I can't learn that on the side, I can't certify for this. Why? Because 15 years ago, you didn't do well in high school physics?
Before we get started on today's episode, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the land of the Darug people. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to our elders past and present and the next generation coming through. Now, onto today's episode. This is part 2 and a continuation of our chat with Justin Sung and Michael Tsai from iCanStudy. If you haven't already, make sure to check out part 1 of our 2-part series before continuing on. If you have, enjoy as we continue our discussion. Before we get started on today's episode, we've got something really exciting we want to share with you. We're hosting our very first live event at the Carter Sydney on April 27th at 6:30 p.m. We're super excited to have a very special guest join us, the incredibly talented communications coach, international speaker, and magician, Vin Jiang. You'll get to enjoy an intimate fireside chat with Vin, where he'll be sharing his thoughts and reflections on the Asian Australian community. Tickets are almost sold out, so grab yours now on our Eventbrite page. Link in the show notes. See you on April 27th.
I can't remember if I told you guys about this last time, but I've got a student who went from like almost failing, C's and C plus, all the way through to like consistently getting 95% plus in all of their tests for all of their subjects. They had a like parent-teacher meeting because the teacher was convinced that the kid was cheating, right? Because they improved, like it was a short span of time. Like they started working with us in the summer holidays, and so like by the time school started, they'd like done a lot of groundwork. And then so the student explained to the teacher what it is that they're doing, and the teacher was like, "Nah, I don't believe that."
Wow.
And they don't believe it because of the fact that that teacher is just plainly ignorant about effective
There's
learning.
another possibility.
I'm very well familiar with what like teacher training programs involve. In fact, some studies have shown that 96% of all teacher training programs are factually inaccurate.
Wow.
Globally.
Globally as well.
Yeah, globally. In fact, there are some studies that have shown that 97 to 98% of all teachers believe in at least one empirically completely debunked myth about learning.
Oh my God.
If that's the position of authority, and that's the person, so this is a student that's getting in trouble for really learning effectively. So they still think he's cheating. They just can't prove it.
It's not fair.
So what ended up happening?
Was this a guy who had to like get his parents to come in and vouch for him, or was some other?
No, I don't think that's the,
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I mean, I don't know what's happening now, but like, I think he's just carrying on and like.
Well, if they can't prove it, I suppose. I mean,
yeah, I know, but it's just.
it's phenomenal to think that.
And I told him like, well, get your teacher to contact me. Like, I'll have a discussion with them. Yeah. And I said, not only get your teacher to contact me, tell your teacher to bring anyone that they want to bring into the discussion. Any learning expert, any person that's even remotely familiar with the resource, let's all have a big discussion together.
I'm thinking about this linear sort of learning, note-taking, all the stuff that you guys talked about as well. And we again touched on the fact that whether or not examinations or assessments are a good way of assessing, the effectiveness or the knowledge or the domain knowledge of a particular area of expertise. And I think the same way when I sort of think to some of the friends or students that I used to grow up with, and they would absolutely kill the exams because in a good sense, they do very well. Because if an exam generally was structured in a very predictable linear kind of way.
You mean gaming the system?
Right, exactly. And I think we touched on this last time, which is that if they can essentially predict what will be in the exam, they'll do very well. But as soon as there is a slight deviation away from it, game over.
So curriculums are starting to try to avoid that. They're trying to make test questions that make it so that it's less gameable. So people are starting to wise up to it. But I mean, the problem is that even if the curriculums were like assessed in a way that makes it, impossible to game the system, I mean, you're not teaching students how to actually achieve the learning anyway. In fact, you're still telling people to like learn that. Like, there's a complete disconnect between an understanding about what type of studying you do and the type of learning it produces. If you study in a certain way that produces a certain type of outcome, you can expect that student is going to have a learning that is consistent with that process. You can't assess them in this way and then teach them to study in this way and then wonder, why is there this huge gap?
Yeah, and I think the common term for these kind of tricky questions, if you like, curveball questions, right? They're like not expected. They're a little bit different, like, and then often than not, students who see these, like, panic ensues, like, the blood gets drained out of their faces. They're like, what's happening kind of thing. Like, this wasn't the thing I studied. And that's not the thing I memorized, for example. I wrote learned. And it's because a lot of these questions require like deeper thinking, all right? They require, you to have realized, right? That's a huge part, like what you learned before and how it may have impacted or influenced maybe this outcome. So there's more like evaluation, like there's potentially like a bit of creativity in there, adapting your schema of knowledge to what is being assessed, and that is to encourage learning for the betterment of you, not for the fact that you learn to get this result in this exam.
Right.
Yeah. But the reality is like what we're talking about is like what we call higher order learning, right? Like that's just a completely different skill set to what students are normally used to or encouraged to do at a younger level, which is what we call lower order learning, style, techniques. And there is definitely, you go from obviously lower to higher, but then a lot of people don't realize that. So they just study harder and they write more notes, use more highlighters, and they basically compare themselves against each other on these things because, like parents with the best of intentions tell them to just work hard. And I talk to a lot of parents, and some of these parents are, they break down in front of me. They're like, I know my kid's suffering. Like they know, because they know their kid well. Like they know the original kind of happy, do's and dudettes, they had, and now they're just kind of like in this miserable situation, but they're kind of like hopefully a short term, right? So that they can get into the program they want to get into, whatever it may be.
Plot twist though, it's not.
Just keep it.
Keep some hope in the system.
But the point is like they know, right? And they're like, yeah, we don't like the idea of gaming the system, but like we kind of have to because they don't know of any alternatives. So really, I think a huge part of this, for us at least, is really trying to build awareness and bring awareness about this gap, why this exists, and it's because of the absence of awareness surrounding metacognition, but specifically high order learning.
Yeah, and one thing that I find is like, I kind of understand from a sort of psychological aspect, like why people react sometimes in this way, but one of the things that I'm constantly pushing, right, is like the idea of this alternative. I'm always teaching the techniques around what these alternatives actually involve. And there will be people commenting or, sort of talking about how like they're sort of rejecting this, right? They're sort of rejecting it and saying, oh, this is not true. This is not how it works. But here's the thing, right? It's like, what I'm saying is that you can achieve a higher result. You can get better memory. You can perform better using a different method to what you're using right now, right? And that is a trainable skill. And it takes some time and it takes some diligence, but you can learn how to do that and you can get better. If you reject that and you're someone that is like, just wanting to use the same existing, common techniques and methods, and you're not doing so well, like you're basically saying that your life is just locked there. Like you're cutting off all potential. Like, you're basically saying like, well, this is just the nature of human capacity. Some people are just smarter. Some people are just not. Yes, some people may use a certain technique and not have the best result, but such is life. Like, what they are basically saying is like they would rather prefer that rather than what I'm saying is like there's legitimately like a more hopeful alternative that opens up the door for more potential. And so I find it a kind of like a sort of like a paradox in a way, in that a lot of students have sort of anxiety and insecurity, not just students, right? Like all the way through, of all ages. A lot of people have sort of insecurity, anxiety about how learning is meant to be and what it looks like and what they're used to and what they're comfortable with. And they have this existing set of experiences around what type of result that method produces. And what they want is that they want that just to be the case. That should just be fixed. And they're feeling anxious about that, rather than actually embracing the idea that there is another option that opens up this new sort of door.
Is that how you
Go on.
Is that how you approach people who come in, or students that you might have to deal with that kind of don't want to be there in the system and their parents are forcing them through this path?
It's an interesting question. I had a parent who, we know each other personally, and he was just like, how do I get my kid to like do your course? Because he could see the benefit. but the kid didn't. And I was just like, well, you leave it to them, right, to make that decision. You'd be like, hey, here's what it does. You know, make sure you explain to them. Probably don't yell at them. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's what it does. Here's how the course works. We'll do better.
Yeah, do better. Like, take it.
This will help you.
Yeah.
Please. You will love it.
Yeah.
Enjoy the process.
Yeah. And then I'm just like, well, explain to him, you know, what it's all about. And then like, it's his choice. You know,
Yeah.
And that's a part of it too. And I'm definitely, I mean, I don't have kids, so I'm not some parent and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like we are going back to what we were saying before. It's just like the whole being open-minded and, you know, like be willing to be like, all right, there could be something else. And like what Justin said, the paradox, you know, it's like they put themselves in the situation at the beginning. And I was thinking about the example of Blockbusters. A long time ago.
Again, versus Netflix,
Yeah, versus Netflix. That's right, exactly. And then, you know, it's like, no. I mean, look, I don't know how, you know, who ran like Blockbusters and how it worked and all that kind of stuff, but it was a big thing. I remembered, I can't remember what it was, like Tuesday, like deals or whatever, like, like it was like a great place to go, right? And then you know, on the holidays, you get to rent out the Nintendo 64, right, with Mario Kart, right? So it's a big part of it. But the point is like, well, Netflix just, you know, took over like that. And then Blockbusters just kind of sat there, right? Well, in the business world, which is the real world, as we know, okay, well, that's what happens to businesses, right? That have a lot of money, okay? So why would you think like that wouldn't work in any other context when it comes to people, you know, trying to find their way in life? That, hey, you know, if this is actually not working out, maybe you should, you know, step back a little bit and then reassess your situation honestly, and maybe admit that what you're doing isn't the best, and that you need to find someone who, like, you know, at least has thought more about this than you. Ideally, someone who has, you know, qualifications and extensive experience, you know, about these matters,
or
and
gotten to where you want to get to.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, that's the minimum. Yeah,
As a minimum, but even then, like, you know, one thing I was talking about before in another podcast was that people that have gotten to where you want to go, they often don't have the metacognition to understand what it is that got them there.
Got there in spite of certain things?
Well, it could be, but it's just the idea that, you know, just because someone got somewhere doesn't, like, okay, I mean, there's a trillion business coaches out there, okay, and then, like, you know, there's maybe a handful of ones that are, like, you know, really good. A lot of business coaches are not really, like, very effective. It doesn't mean that they're not good at business, but they're not necessarily great at communicating why it is, or really pinpointing what it was that was special that got them in that position. And likewise, with something like learning, a lot of people are relying on the fact that they have a naturally high level of processing ability. And so they could be doing a lot of things that are ineffective and succeeding in spite of it. Or there could be small components that are, you know, helping them, but that small component may not be enough for what that person needs, or it may not be the thing that is going to help them the most. There could be another component that this person never had to ever struggle with. So I think, and also with sort of social media these days, is that there isn't that need for accountability for putting advice out there. So I've got one of my students who used to be like a StudyGram influencer. They had like 100,000 plus followers on Instagram, where they just upload photos of their notes. And they're very pretty. They have like special highlighters things, you know, calligraphy and, you know, all that sort of stuff, right?
Everything from Muji.
Yeah. And they have like these cute little stickers and things that they put over there. It's beautiful, right? You know, if they want to be an artist. But you know, they're not doing they weren't previously. They weren't actually doing very well. And in fact, a lot of the reason that they were so engaged in their channel was because that was where they were getting validation from. They felt proud in these notes that they were putting out. They would take photos of them. Everyone else was like, wow, it's so amazing, blah, blah, blah. And when I talked to them about it, like, once they started realizing how kind of, you know, ineffective it was, and they started changing their own methods and practices. And I talked to them about it, and it was a female. And you know, and I talked to her about why, you know, she's like posting this sort of stuff, and she sort of said, well, you know, it's just harmless. Like, I'm just sharing something that, you know, I'm doing with. But I was saying, like, you're having like 300-400 comments on some of these posts that you're putting up there, and these people are saying, this must be, you know, this person's 100,000 followers, this must be the way that I should study. And so they're basing their entire study strategy
conclusions from that.
Yeah. based on this photo of notes that she now realizes is completely ineffective. She actually closed her account.
She closed it?
Yeah. So I have big respect to her for actually doing that, because she realized it was not actually.
She took responsibility for.
Yeah. But most people are not going to do that, you know?
Yeah.
And in fact, go through your favorite like StudyGram or StudyTalk influencers account and look for that post. There's going to be that post. And if it's not there, it's coming. The post that says, hey, I just wanted to tell you all that, you know, I know that I post about a lot of study content, but I'm not actually really like that good at studying. Like I don't have the best results. But you look for that post, you know, and really think like, how much does this person know about, you know, for example, studying, but in any case, right? Like how much does this person know about being able to replicate success, and how accountable are they going to be for the advice that they're giving?
And even then, you know, we're talking about like mirroring success, right? Like you get young people, and, you know, again, it's totally cool to be proactive and resourceful, but they ask the first successful person on the top of their head, like how to help them with success in their own lives, even though they're in a completely different era, doing completely different things, possibly in a completely different country, plus they're different people, you know, like kind of all these variables, very major variables. And then the other person, yeah, out of kindness, I guess. Well, sometimes it might not be out of kindness, might be the fact that they feel validated too, right? Because someone has actually entrusted them with their lives, essentially. Be like, oh yeah, here's how you do it.
Yeah.
So hold on a sec. Hold on. Like, let's not talk about whether you're qualified or not, but is any of your advice even like, you know, for example, relevant really?
And you talk, and like I've actually on multiple occasions confronted people that I thought gave pretty unaccountable advice, and they always say the same thing. Oh, it's just my perspective. Like I'm just putting it out there, you know.
That's not what they think.
You know, but it's like, well, you're not specifying that. You're not saying here's a limitation of my advice, and here are all the reasons. If you fit this criteria, you may not be relevant. They're not even thinking about that. They're just saying, oh, here's some advice. You know, take with it what you will. They don't care about their accountability. Like one of the things that I used to say for my staff for my medical business was, if you're giving advice and your advice turns out to be factually incorrect and it's actually leading someone wrong, you need to quit your degree. You know, you need to have the accountability on the advice, because your advice, if it's followed by someone that stops them from entering this pathway, you need to be prepared to sacrifice just as much. If you put standards like that, it's amazing how much people start withholding stuff because
Much
they start
more
questioning like, is this actually good advice or is it not? Same with a lot of like study influencers, where they say this is the way that you should be learning, this is the way that you should be studying. And it's like, well, you know, that's not really like valid. And it's like, well, it's just my opinion, it's just my perspective, it's just my experience. Well, then let the people that are watching know where the limitations of it. Let them know that you are giving advice to millions of people and you've never worked with a single student in your entire life. Let them know that you've never had feedback on the technique. Let them know that you've never really looked into the research before.
And it's like, you know, you can talk about all sorts of things in person, right, verbally. And you're like, can you write that down for me and send it in the official document and sign off your name and like, or whatever?
Yeah, and that you're accountable for it.
Yeah.
You know?
Frame it up that way, right?
Yeah.
I think about like even the finance influencers recently with how Assec, which is the governing body of here in Australia around sort of compliance, around financial advice.
Right.
And if you're an accountant, if you're a financial planner, anyone who's in a qualified position, you have to make it very clear as to the limitations of your expertise. And yet the internet is this wild west of just unaccountability.
Oh, yeah.
People out there are just giving out advice unassumed. And it's resulting in people taking that information, usually out of context or from someone unqualified, and then executing on that and then having to deal with the ramifications of
and
it
it causes
as well.
harm. It
Big
causes
time.
real harm.
Yeah.
All for likes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's,
It's all for the, and again, it goes back to, I mean, if there's a lot of similarities that I can draw between, say, even the education system based on what you guys tell me, which is that the way things are measured and the way success is deemed and the reasons why students are motivated to take certain decisions based on what they do in their behaviors is not in the best interest of what it is that they're trying to achieve. You know, you talk about, you know, the fact that they're trying to avoid being badmouthed by the teacher, you know, during parent-teacher night. Like, that's not a good reason for any student to do what it is they're doing, especially if it doesn't work in their favor as well. So if you're like a parent or even if you're a teacher, and like it all sounds very like sometimes a bit morbid because you guys are saying like there's systematic issues, there's, you know, the teacher's not qualified and like there's all these things. Does it go back to you as a student having to take matters into your own hands? And if so, what can they do? Like if you had to go, that's the place you start, where do you start?
iCanStudy.com.
Yeah, I was going to say just before iCanStudy.com. I swear this wasn't planned.
No. So like, again, like I'm going to say, if you're a parent, whatever, like, educator, like I'm going to ignore that side of things. Like I'm talking about the learner of whatever age, right? If you're the learner, it's going to be up to you. You're the one that has to take responsibility. First thing that I'd say, really start challenging the way that you do things and questioning the beliefs that you have about your learning capacity and where that comes from. A lot of people, like especially professionals, they'll say, "Oh, I can't go back to uni. I can't take this course. I can't learn that on the side. I can't certify for this." Why? Because 15 years ago, you didn't do well in high school physics. Really challenge a lot of the conceptions that people have. In my experience, I've, at this stage, I've worked with a decent number of professionals from a pretty wide range of fields. I found that professionals usually are able to ramp up their learning efficiency much more than they expect. They know that they have learned a few more things about how to learn, and so they're feeling a little bit more confident. But that's just the surface, Those little optimizations that you figure out from just like years of trial and error, that's usually just touching the surface of what can be possible. So have a little bit more like faith and confidence in yourself that you are able to actually achieve a lot more if you know what the methods and the processes are. The second thing is that you have to start really dismantling what you're doing and compartmentalizing it. So think about like the process that you're using for studying and actually, or learning anything, and think about, start by listing it down so you even know what it is that you're doing and why it is that you're doing it. What type of effect is it actually creating? And how sure are you that that effect is being created by that particular activity? Is it coming from that activity, or could it be coming from something else? And a great couple questions that I would say you can ask is, how do I know that this is producing this thing? Where does that come from? Is it just because it's like my intuition? Is it because that's what I have heard? Is it, just, what's commonly done? And the second question would be, is there someone that could do this and not have that effect? Or is there someone that would not need to do this and still have the effect? So you can isolate out, the variables. And try to get to the point where you only have things that produce certain consistent effects. You just really strip it down. And then from there, start building outwards, step by step by step. The reason I recommend this is because if you start with like a big way of like how you're used to learning, and you start to just, and with a single big mind think, where can I improve things? Where can I improve things? It's just too complicated. Everything is tangled together. It's hard to separate things out. First of all, separate it, start compartmentalizing it, distill it, and then from there, start building slowly. And it's a process that takes time, but a year from now, you're either going to be a lot better at learning or you're not, And which position would you rather be in?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to add on to that, to provide, everyone more context in terms of what, Justin's referring to for maybe this change to actually be like more doable. I would actually say to go check out your, again, not scripted or anything, but like your actual YouTube channel. That's
so
really
I talk
good.
about this stuff in a lot of depth, So like my videos are long. They are usually quite meaty, and I go into lots of depth and a wide range of topics because I know that people that hear about this and they understand the problem, they want to know what the solution is. And sometimes it takes a while to explain the solution broadly enough so that it's consistent. It's consistent enough that people can actually have a chance at success. It's not great for the YouTube algorithm, but at the end of the day, like if a message is delivered without enough of those variables considered, the message actually changes, right? Nuance is part of the package of understanding how to do something. So yeah, I think that
and you can see Justin's like whole suite of emotions, like he just gets into it. But I think for a lot of people I talk to who've watched that video, they're like, man, this guy's actually getting like annoyed over like the kind of things that people are doing, and he's like, just obviously it's free, okay, and he's like getting annoyed over like on the free platform, that's kind of weird. But some of his videos, like the one about how to train yourself up to be a genius, that's like on the way to probably 600,000 views,
something. Yeah.
So I would say, and another one, for example, that
and that video also, by the way, that's a great example of a video that has like all these comments being like, it's not real, like you can't do this, and it's like, well, like, fine, be an idiot for the rest of your life. Just,
right.
Like, why would you want to believe that?
What else are you going to do? Yeah, and then some people are like, oh, but I don't have enough time for this. And it's like, okay, so what would you rather have? Would you rather like just not do it, not spend like 20 minutes or 30 minutes like reviewing this thing. And it's interesting because the comments is like, there's this one comment, I think, I'm not sure if it's this specific video, but it was just like, does Justin not know we have busy lives? And it was like too long, like, what was it?
I wonder why he gets so angry.
Yeah.
And then like there are other people who are like, look, I've really struggled with like study. And he's like
for like 10 years.
For like 10 years. And he's hitting all these things.
In like 30 minutes.
And and he's like, and in 30 minutes, we just got a message like on the way here. But we're taking public transport.
Like literally, my phone's on me, but like literally one of our employees was in like a coffee shop. And
Starbucks.
Was a Starbucks. Yeah. And saw another student studying. I don't even think they like knew.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they referred them to my YouTube
They have
channel.
very, very fun highlighting.
I saw just in the photo of it, like not even directly of the notes, but I just saw in the photo, I saw the like painted highlighted page. And so they looked at the YouTube channel, and then apparently like 30 minutes later, they went over, bought a coffee and said, like, I just learned more in the last 30 minutes than I have in my entire life.
Wow.
Yeah. So
it's like you do that. You do what you do now also partly because of that reason,
of course.
Which is that sort of level of impact.
I mean, people don't realize like, that some of the stuff that I'm teaching is, yes, I'm teaching it in, 30 to 40 minutes, like there's a special place in hell just for people that make long YouTube videos, right? But like, it took me 10 years to figure out how to distill it down to 30, 40 minutes. And like, sure, maybe 10 more years later, I'll distill it into 20 minutes. So, okay, fine. Maybe you can wait, wait for my grandchildren to eventually produce the TikTok that allows you to transform your whole method of thinking in the
30 minutes to 30 seconds.
This episode is produced and brought to you by Social Wave. Social Wave is a strategic content marketing agency helping businesses grow revenue using video, podcasts, and SEO. Head on over to socialwave.com.au to find out more. Now back to the show.
Yeah.
But
so there's that one we talked about before, the training to become a genius one. There's more technical stuff, and also one that's I think quite relevant to a lot of people is like understanding how motivation really works. Because a lot of them are like, I'm not motivated, and they see it as if you're not motivated, you can't do anything. But
breaking down what motivation is and
like how it actually impacts you. I mean, again, there's this whole binary idea, right, behind if I have it, if I don't.
Yep.
And like the stuff that I talk about in that motivation video, for example, like a lot of the stuff I talk about with learning is like relatively novel because I put things together in a way that is uncommon. Like the research is still there. It's all supported, but it's not looked at in that perspective very often. But the stuff for that motivation video, for example, like this is established stuff. Like there's books talking about essentially the exact same thing. All I'm doing is delivering the message through like a slightly different format. And still there are people that are like, nah, this is just like, just people love to I think I've been reading this book recently called The Courage to be Disliked. Have you read it?
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
It's on my list.
Yeah. So it's like a very interesting book, like in a lot of ways. But one of the things that it talks about is the idea that, it takes sort of courage to change the status quo, of your own life. Like if you're doing something a certain way, then there's an expected norm. They talk about the idea of like, you're driving the old rattly car. Like sure, it doesn't handle very well. Sure, it's kind of rattly. It doesn't run very well. But you can expect that, and you can kind of factor it into your driving. But if people are used to something, then they may not really have the courage to change things and face the uncertainty. And if they don't have the courage to do it, what they may do is attack the person basically selling the other car. Yeah. So it may be just sort of externalized out there. And I think that's probably the case with a lot of these situations.
And I think for us to achieve our goal, to get everyone to be more aware of the power, if you like, of higher order learning, being more metacognitively aware, is that there needs to be people who talk about it more, who celebrate it as well. A big part of that is the community, right? Like people need to speak up. I mean, if like one student was thought to cheat, I mean, I guess after a while, if 10 students all doing that, like they can't just expect everyone to be cheating.
There's a ring.
There's a ring.
It's like sample size of one versus many, right? Yeah.
And then eventually, hopefully, like people will be like, oh, maybe there is something in the water, right? That is different. I think one other thing that we're going to be doing with iCanStudy is we're going to be running a lot of free webinars, like where essentially we'll take you through this short experience of having, your thoughts challenged in a friendly way, okay, but also giving you tools that you can immediately use so that you can, take control for once what it is. And I think the typical feedback is that, man, this makes so much sense, but with very little effort. And that's like, and then people are like not used to not trying that hard.
Yeah, they sort of not two in the same,
like,
in the one sentence, right?
Yeah, like for example, one of the webinars we run, like we literally get you to learn something like there and there using like a previous technique versus like just one that we taught you like in like 10 minutes, type of thing, and see what it is, right? So I think fundamentally it gives people a lot of hope. And if there's a community of people basically aware of this, and for the younger audience, like we've got a Discord community. And if you don't know what Discord is, it's totally cool. I didn't know what Discord was until recently. But basically, yeah, it's a place for people to then celebrate and come together and be like, right, cool. How are your learning skills going? As opposed to like, how many notes did you write over the weekend?
Yeah.
All right, that would be cool.
Even just the idea of what people are celebrating, it just makes a big difference from a social sort of psychological point of view. Like if the people around you are celebrating the number of notes that you wrote, or how hard you studied, or how many hours you put in, or how little sleep you got,
How much suffering you had.
Yeah. Like you win the award for like most suffered,
Yeah, like how black your eye, like all that kind of stuff, and how many.
It's like a badge of honor.
We get questions like, we get questions like, how much sleep do you really need? That type of thing. And when people ask that question, you kind of know, where they're heading down. Also, like how many energy drinks do you think is like
the safe amount before you enter?
Because
I'm feeling like my heart like palpitating like all the time, kind of thing.
It's like their own echo chamber.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And they're looking for like people to join
In validation.
the chamber, and it's like it. We say it in sort of like this joking kind of way, but it actually produces real harm. Produces real harm, and it affects people's futures. And if you take like a macroscopic view of it, like you zoom all the way out and like it's just this one person, they had a life where they wanted to do this, but then they ended up doing that, and they had a family and they're happy anyway, whatever. Like it's fine, right? But like still, at the point of making a decision, at the point of thinking about what are the options available, I just think it's more hopeful for someone to feel that they have more options available for them through things that they can control if they choose to control them, which is totally of their own volition anyway, rather than feeling trapped in going in a certain direction. I'd rather at least have people have the ability to like exert their influence and power over the way that they want their life to go, and feel like they can actually control that, because that's something I value a lot in my life, substantially, and that's one of the big reasons I left medicine. And it's just like, it's like a crappy feeling to be in, that when we use the word like soul sucking, I think nothing really is as soul sucking as knowing that your life is on like almost a fixed trajectory because of the fact that so many doors are closing. Right? You just exist. You just exist, and it doesn't. I personally believe, and in my experience, it doesn't have to be that way for a lot of people.
Coming back to your question, I don't know how long it is now, but who should take ownership? Well, if we want to change, then it should be the person who wants to change. Right?
Yes. Yep.
At the end of the day, and I think for us, all of us sitting here, like we've been fortunate enough to realize that quite early. And we've been kind of like through our own lives trying to find, the answer. Okay. And it's not just like, you really quickly realize is that, the answer to one question is just answer to one question. Okay. Maybe that one answer isn't even the answer to just that one question. It's maybe a part of that question.
Right.
And you start looking into it more, but then you got to actually believe in yourself and basically be like, cool, maybe I haven't reached the way I want to, but I know what I'm doing is right. Okay, and that's like a huge thing. And I think for us, like, we just find that for people who like listen to us, who like ask us questions, that they've recognized us as people who they can trust. And we definitely do our part, in trying our best. I mean, we can only, I guess, say that to meet that type of expectation that people have on us. We don't take it lightly. Like, if I was to ask someone for help, I mean, you've probably realized through this whole conversation, like there's a lot of responsibility in the advice that you give, right? Like Justin, he wakes up, he probably, I don't know, I don't really ask him exactly what he does, but I'm guessing he probably just digests, like publications and research, and just like, while he's, instead of reading the papers, he'll be reading like research.
Yep.
And that's for him important. And then at the same time, I get asked questions like, don't you guys get tired? Like, this is all like very heavy stuff, right? And then we're like, well, yes, of course we get tired. That's why we sleep. But like, we can talk about this stuff for like days and days and days. And, maybe that's the reason as to why, like, we're back again, okay, to share more. But that's why, between, I guess, myself and Justin, at least, we tag team and it just keeps developing.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, like, what is it for? Well, it's for the people who care about themselves. And if we can be part of their journey and getting to where they want to be, and whether it is career, whether it is like, relationships, like whatever, like I think everything is very intertwined, right? But ultimately, like, people use the words like empowerment, enablement, that kind of thing. Like, we are quite literally giving you like methodologies to enable that, not just the feeling. And I think when you realize that it's because of like literally you, not, for example, someone giving you a pat on the back and convincing you that you are a better version of who you think you are, that you actually own it, that like hopefulness like is so sustainable.
One thing I've found about that is because I've interacted with a lot of people that have sort of coaching, but they also do mostly sort of speaking type things.
Yeah.
And the kind of message of like empowerment and self-betterment and things is like important. And I think it's like a positive kind of energy to sort of spread around there. But in like a private discussion, they sort of are aware of the fact that that is sometimes a fairly short-lived kind of sensation, is that you have this like surge of feeling, but that emotion is just hits against a wall because it doesn't know how to change it into something that really pushes through and creates a result. I don't think I'm the best person at making people feel empowered. I don't think I'm the person that is able to like, inspire the masses to, do something. But I think I can at least pave like the path so that that energy can be directed in something that actually translates into something that lasts, like a personal asset that you can then draw on again.
Yeah. And recently, I mean, obviously with COVID and, whatnot, like Melbourne, Sydney, especially, like you have this period where essentially for 2 years, like things are not normal, right? For students. And at the same time, like, a lot of people struggle with that. Like, there's a conversation topic globally, right? And now there's like a lot of efforts to like, ensure accessibility, to make sure people like make up for whatever it is. But at the same time, while people are feeling like very, not cheated necessarily, because, who are you going to blame for COVID necessarily? But they feel like, oh, they've missed out. But at the same time, there are people who are like, it was a great opportunity for
They did better. There are some people that did
They
better.
thrived in the environment.
They thrived.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. And these are the people who are like, right, cool. There's a difference in environment, clearly. Right. Let's see what we can make of it. And they're able to thrive, not just based on that thought, but because they have the skills, the techniques, or the way, right, to do that. And then now they'll probably, I don't know, I hear a lot of students, sometimes they go back to school and they're just like, it's almost holding me back a bit.
Yeah. And you know what? This has actually been researched as well. There's actually things being published on the idea of certain types of skills that students are able to have, transferable generic skills that students have, that were able to protect them against the negative effects of COVID, or in some cases give them an unfair advantage, not because they're necessarily doing that much better, but because their performance didn't change, whereas everyone else got worse. So I think something like COVID and lockdown, where the external environment started becoming so unoptimum, it revealed a lot of the issues that people kind of, it was sort of previously
always
covered
there.
up.
Yeah.
It was there. And those same issues are probably, well, not actually probably, a lot of those same issues are things that would have come up later in uni, later in life, with more difficult situations where it's not padded enough for them, and those sharp edges start poking through. And I think COVID just kind of pulled back the curtain on that a little bit earlier than...
I totally agree. And I sort of, to wrap things up, I think if there's like one lesson that I sort of figured out fairly early on, I'd like to think, is that generally I have a saying is like, you should have strong opinions held loosely. And that is the idea that when you have new data input into your paradigms and the way you think, you should reconsider it, as opposed to what we see a lot now, particularly in the comment section of the internet, is just really strong opinions held very strongly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a high level of stubbornness and this sort of almost a sunk cost fallacy around this is the pathway I've trodden, or this is what I know of it, and therefore I have to project that across to everyone else. And I think on an individual level, we all have to take into account what happens externally and internally, and figure out how we navigate it themselves. Because like you said, if we're waiting for a systemic change, or we're waiting for wholesale macro level change, you could be waiting a while.
Oh yeah.
And so it's really about taking matters into your own hands right now. And that doesn't matter if you're a student in, primary education, right through to a working professional, right through to you might be 50, 60 near the end of your career. It's almost like a life principle as opposed to a learning principle in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Well, life is learning.
Life is learning. Yeah, exactly right.
And there was it. What we saw this quote the other day, right? I can't remember who it was. It was like the moment you stop, you guys in social, the moment you stop learning.
I think literally it was like the moment you stop learning, you die.
like literally.
You get old, right?
Yeah.
You're old when you stop learning, or something to that nature.
Yeah, like you.
No, I think it actually just said like you die.
Yeah, like
I can't remember who it was, but it was like
there's a famous author. I can remember that. But yeah, like at the end of the day, look, the point is like, what do you care more about? Like, do you care about what you feel like your preference is, or do you care more about like what do you want to do, what do you want to achieve? And I think sometimes people think they're the same thing, but they're not.
Yes.
Like in business, we talk about putting your own kind of ego aside, right? And opening up and putting yourself in the room of people who are much smarter and better at you. Like, we all know that. And that's how we learn. We get challenged, right? But then having this, I guess, humility to yourself, right? Really, for your own benefit is incredibly important. And that just opens up, a world of options.
Yeah, absolutely.
And wait, I just want to make one final closing, almost
like your mic drop. Yeah.
Caveat. No, it's not really a mic drop. It's like picking the mic back up again, slowly, gently. Is that what Michael just said in terms of like, what do you care about more is like your preferences or your feeling or what you want to achieve and the outcome that you want. I don't think that there's a right answer to that. It is really about what you care about and what you value more. And I have a lot of respect for people that know that what they care about more is their preference and and what they feel, and they're happy to do that. And that's a perfectly valid way of living. No one can tell you that's wrong. But if you are someone that more values the outcome or what you want to achieve, then sometimes there's going to have to be a compromise. And it's just simply like understanding there's not one that's better or worse. But it's that if you are of this state of mind, then it's going to require you to sort of detach from that preference or that feeling, at least sometimes.
And be prepared to be challenged.
Yeah.
And be prepared for the unexpected, because that's part of it.
Yeah.
And without that, like we talk about growing up and doing all these things to be challenges, and by overcoming them, like for me, I've learned that overcoming challenges means that I must have done something right or something different to be able to achieve that. And I think if you can embrace that at the end of the day, like, as long as you're doing the right things and, doing things for yourself and thinking about the right way of how you would, go, like just how you hold yourself accountable, there's always going to be something you can learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Wise words. Appreciate you boys coming back on the show, Justin and Michael. I know you guys aren't from Sydney, so it's a bit of a trek through it.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming back onto the show.
Thanks for having us again.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Level Asian podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode. And why not share it with friends and family who might enjoy it too? Also, make sure you head over to levelasianpodcast.com to join our email list and to receive the latest updates and get notified when the next episode drops. If you know a great guest we should feature, email us at contact@levelasianpodcast.com or DM us on our socials in the show notes. Catch you on the next episode.